Child, if you stay, I'll give you 1 billion. No, 2 billion. In the main hall of the Pei family's old residence, old Master Pei sat on a pearwood chair, pleading with the girl before him. But Ruan Qingwan, sitting opposite him, shook her head and pushed the hefty check back. Grandpa, I'm sorry. Our agreement was for 6 years. The time is up, my debt is repaid. It's time for me to leave. Seeing Ruan Qingwan's resolve, old Master Pei sighed. These years have been hard on you. Before you leave, tell me anything you want. Ruan Qingwan remained silent for a long time before finally saying, I want you to agree to Pei Xingyan and Pei Yin being together. You had me get close to Pei Xingyan to make him forget about Pei Yin. But now, 6 years later, as you can see, perhaps true love cannot be broken. Hearing this, old Master Pei sighed heavily again, his eyes filled with fatigue and helplessness. Forget it. I'm old. I won't interfere with the young people's affairs anymore. Let them do as they please. As for the divorce, child, you should discuss it with Xingyan yourself. Ruan Qingwan nodded, bowed respectfully to the old man, and then got up and walked towards the door. After getting into the car, she took one last look at the old residence. The first time she came to this house was to repay her kindness. She was an orphan from the Welfare Institute. She should have dropped out of school like the other children, but she was lucky enough to be chosen by old Master Pei and received funding from the Pei family to continue her education. She was talented and hardworking, skipping grades all the way, graduating from Peking University with a doctorate at the young age of 22. The year she completed her studies, she specifically came to the Pei family's old residence to thank old Master Pei in person. He sat there, looking exhausted, and made a request of her. Child, the Pei family doesn't lack money. If you want to repay your kindness, agree to one request. From today onwards, for the next 6 years, get close to my heir, Pei Xingyan, and bear him a child, so he can let go of his sister. It was then that Ruan Qingwan learned that Pei Xingyan, the heir to the Pei Corporation, had fallen in love with his adopted sister. He was willing to give up his position as heir, regardless of social norms, to be with her. He had always been the perfect heir, a child of privilege, but for a woman, he became so rebellious. The entire Pei family was anxious, and to put an end to his thoughts, they sent Pei Yin abroad. But from then on, Pei Xingyan drank heavily and became despondent. To repay her kindness, she agreed. After that, she began to approach Pei Xingyan, pursuing him relentlessly, playing the role of a lovesick admirer. Finally, she successfully married him and bore him a child. For 6 whole years, she worked diligently and without complaint. But recently, after Pei Yin returned to the country, his buried feelings immediately reignited. Even their son, frequently taken to see Pei Yin, had developed a fondness for her and started to dislike his own mother. It turned out that he had never forgotten his white moonlight. Fortunately, from now on, it all had nothing to do with her. The Pei family had only bound her for 6 years, and now the child was born. She could finally leave. Her wandering thoughts were interrupted, and her gaze returned to the car's interior. The next second, she saw an out-of-control truck heading towards her. Then came the sound of several impacts. Bang! The moment the feeling of weightlessness came, her forehead hit the hard car seat, and intense pain overwhelmed her consciousness. Ruan Qingwan's vision went black, and she completely fainted. When she woke up again, the pure white ceiling and the pungent smell of disinfectant reminded her of where she was. The nurse who came to check on her asked her some basic information and then sighed. You're lucky. You only have a slight concussion. Over a dozen patients were brought in from the multi-vehicle collision on Binhai Road, and you're the only survivor. The nurse checked her condition again and breathed a sigh of relief. There's no major problem. Contact your family to come and sign the discharge papers. She sat up with difficulty, still recovering from the terror of surviving the accident. After a while, she nodded, sat up, took her phone, and dialed Pei Xingyan's number. The ringing continued, but he never answered. Finally, perhaps annoyed, he hung up. 1 call, 2 calls, 3 calls. Ruan Qingwan made a dozen calls, but he never picked up. She lowered her eyes and clicked on another number, her son Pei Zhilin's. Time passed bit by bit, the call was hung up again and again. Finally, a message popped up on the screen. Can you stop bothering me? I have important things to do. Oh, and make some chicken soup at home. The impatient tone, the commanding attitude, if you didn't know better, who would guess the message was from the son she carried for 10 months? Outside the ward, nurses passed by in the corridor, and their conversation drifted in. Mr. Pei is so good to his wife. It's just a small burn from hot water, almost healed, yet he booked an entire floor. And the young master is so well-behaved and obedient, helping out with everything. You're mistaken. That's not Mrs. Pei, it's Mr. Pei's adopted sister, Pei Yin. But you're new to Nanqing, so you don't know. Mr. Pei seems to be in love with his sister. He was willing to give up his inheritance to be with her. It was a huge scandal. It was only after Miss Pei was sent abroad that he married the current Mrs. Pei. At this moment, Ruan Qingwan finally understood what the father and son were busy with. She couldn't help but laugh. If she had really died in that accident, would there even be anyone to claim her body? She looked up at the nurse and said softly, "Excuse me, I don't have any family. Can I sign the papers myself?" Perhaps it was the first time she had seen someone with no family. The nurse's eyes showed sympathy, and finally, she made an exception and handed her the discharge papers. She completed the discharge procedures alone. When she went to pick up her medicine, she passed by a ward. The voices coming from inside were very familiar. Ruan Qingwan subconsciously glanced inside and saw Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin both at Pei Yin's bedside, their faces showing a tenderness and obedience she had never seen before. She watched silently, without any expression, as if the people inside were not her husband and son. After a while, she looked away and turned to leave. Back home, Ruan Qingwan took out a divorce agreement from the drawer. In the place for the husband's signature, the 3 characters of Pei Xingyan were written smoothly. Suddenly, she seemed to see him signing his name back then. His eyes distant, looking at her without a trace of emotion. "Ruan Qingwan, I know you're madly in love with me, but I love someone else. I only married you because my family was pressuring me. Later, if you want a divorce, just sign here. You can leave anytime." Now, she picked up a pen and in the space for the wife's signature. Without any hesitation, she signed her name. The final stroke fell, and the door suddenly opened. She turned around. Pei Xingyan stood at the doorway, holding Pei Zhilin's hand. Father and son wore matching black, hand-tailored suits, tall and elegant, their handsome and noble demeanor as if carved from the same mold. "Why did you make so many calls? Where's the soup? It's not ready yet? All you do at home is housework. Can't you even do this right?" Ruan Qingwan didn't bother arguing with his attitude, only calmly replying, "It's warming in the kitchen." Having received his answer, he didn't linger for a moment, letting go of Pei Xingyan's hand and hurrying to the kitchen. Pei Xingyan walked forward, his tone cold. "Zhilin is still young. I'll correct his attitude later." Ruan Qingwan didn't take his words to heart. Pei Zhilin was, after all, the child she had risked her life to bring into this world. Although he had always been cold to her, he used to call her Mom. But since Pei Yin's return, and whatever she had said to Pei Zhilin, he now believed Ruan Qingwan was the villain who separated him from his aunt, his attitude plummeting. He no longer looked her in the eye, let alone spoke to her properly. "No need." She shook her head, then after a moment, looked at him calmly. "Pei Xingyan, I've signed the divorce agreement. I don't want the child. I don't want the money. I'll leave after the 1-month cooling-off period." Before she could finish speaking, Pei Zhilin came running back, hugging a thermos, his eager voice completely drowning out the end of her sentence. "Dad, let's go see Auntie. She must be scared all alone in the hospital room." Pei Xingyan seemed to snap back to reality then, looking at her and asking indifferently, "What did you just say?" "I didn't hear." He said it as if it were perfectly natural. Ruan Qingwan looked at him, recalling how he had been looking in her direction just moments ago, his eyes unfocused, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. So he hadn't been listening to her at all. Even though he was home, the person he truly cared about was Pei Yin in the hospital. Thinking this, she didn't bother repeating herself, just shaking her head and saying softly, "Nothing." He didn't care anyway. Whether he knew she was leaving or not didn't matter anymore. Ruan Qingwan watched the 2 figures, one large and one small, gradually disappear at the doorway, without a word to stop them. They were gone for several days, which gave Ruan Qingwan free time. She used this time to submit an application to the National Research Institute. As a genius who had earned her doctorate at 22, if she hadn't married to repay a debt of gratitude, she would certainly have been a pillar of the nation. After all, several of her classmates from that year had already won Nobel Prizes. Now that she had repaid her debt and had no other family, she only wanted to fulfill her original ambitions. A few days after submitting her application, her phone suddenly rang. She picked it up to see an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was filled with surprise and excitement, and Ruan Qingwan quickly recognized her former classmate. "Qingwan, are you really planning to come back? Everyone in our circle has heard about it. You were the most talented among us, but you suddenly disappeared." The professor kept lamenting what a pity it was. Now that you're returning, he's been so happy he hasn't slept in days. We're all so happy for you. Looks like the entire academic world is about to shake. She heard the teasing tone in his words and smiled faintly, finally finding a long-lost smile. "Don't worry, I'll dedicate all my time to academics from now on. As for everything else, I don't want it anymore." Before she could finish her sentence, the door was pushed open and Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin's voices rang out simultaneously. "What don't you want anymore?" They came back unexpectedly and overheard her phone call. Ruan Qingwan's heart skipped a beat. Subconsciously, she hung up and turned to face them, hiding the surprise in her eyes and maintaining a calm expression. "Nothing, I was just cleaning out some unused things and plan to throw them away in a couple of days. I don't need them anymore." Pei Xingyan still felt something was off. His gaze was fixed on her, intense enough to burn a hole through her. Yet, she remained unhurried and showed no signs of guilt. He lowered his eyes, thinking he must have been overthinking. "Why are you back?" Seeing their suspicions dispelled, she smoothly changed the subject. Upon hearing this, Pei Zhilin didn't hold back and immediately started complaining and ordering her around. "I can't get used to the food and accommodation outside, so I came back. Go and cook. I want sweet and sour spare ribs." She frowned and subconsciously turned to Pei Xingyan, only to find him standing still, saying nothing, but the meaning in his eyes was clear, evidently sharing Pei Zhilin's thoughts. She pursed her lips and turned towards the kitchen, suddenly feeling ridiculous. Ruan Qingwan busied herself for a long time before finally serving the dishes. Seeing the two naturally sit close together, she sat on the other side and suddenly spoke. "Let's call back the previous housekeepers." Pei Xingyan frowned. This was the first time she had made a request. "Why?" "I'm leaving soon, and there will be no one to take care of you. It's better for you to adapt in advance." Her tone remained calm, yet it deepened his frown. "Leaving? Where are you going?" Pei Zhilin finally put down his chopsticks and looked at her with a hint of imperceptible disdain in his eyes. "Are you angry because we've been busy taking care of my aunt lately? But where else can you go if you leave us?" Pei Xingyan looked at her deeply. Ruan Qingwan had never worked, had no family background, and no qualifications. Leaving the Pei family, leaving him, where else could she go? She wouldn't leave, never. Neither father nor son took this interlude to heart, and Ruan Qingwan didn't explain further, only sighing softly. The meal ended hastily, and no one mentioned it again. At midnight, Ruan Qingwan and Pei Xingyan lay in the same bed, neither asleep. She had long been accustomed to this life of separate dreams, staying far away from him, closing her eyes and slowing her breathing. The spot beside her suddenly dipped, followed by a wave of warmth. He reached out and naturally wrapped his arm around her waist, his hot breath brushing against her neck. Sensing his intentions, Ruan Qingwan was about to push him away when a low, husky voice reached her ears. "Yin." The voice was filled with almost tangible affection. In an instant, her mind flashed back to every intimate moment they had shared over the years. Every time their passion reached its peak, the name he uttered was Yin. A wave of disgust suddenly surged through her. She forcefully pushed him away, bringing him back to reality. Confusion flashed in his eyes, unsure why she was reacting this way. Was it because of that Yin? But this wasn't the first time, and he had already told her that his heart belonged to someone else. What was she making a fuss about now? Ruan Qingwan saw his thoughts and simply got out of bed, grabbed a blanket, and walked towards the door. "I'll sleep in the guest room." Pei Xingyan couldn't find any words to stop her, so he could only sit on the bed and watch her leave without hesitation, a flicker of inexplicable frustration crossing his usually cold face. In the following days, neither of them yielded. The relationship between them remained lukewarm. Until Pei Zhilin's birthday. Pei Xingyan threw him a grand party, with many guests, including Pei Yin. Ruan Qingwan sat in the corner, watching her husband and son surround Pei Yin, showering her with warmth and care. The intimate interaction between the three of them made them look more like a family than she did with them. "Mr. Pei, Mrs. Pei, young Master Pei." Several people approached with glasses of wine, naturally striking up conversations after greeting them. Hearing this address, Pei Xingyan froze. This was the 56th person today who had mistaken their relationship. He subconsciously looked towards Ruan Qingwan and saw her lower her head impassively, hiding all her emotions. His heart suddenly softened. He offered an explanation. Yin is not Mrs. Pei, she's my sister. Only then did those people realize their mistake and quickly apologized. After leaving, the group gathered to discuss amongst themselves. I saw Mr. Pei constantly surrounding that woman named Yin, so I thought she was Mrs. Pei. Turns out she's not. Then where's the real Mrs. Pei? Someone who knew pointed in Ruan Qingwan's direction. There, that one. That's so tragic. The son's birthday party, and the husband and son are both fawning over another woman. Ruan Qingwan pretended not to hear, her expression remaining calm. It wasn't until the gift-giving segment that she stepped forward, holding out a key to Pei Zhilin. I locked your gift in a safe. Open it and you'll see. The safe contained birthday gifts for Pei Zhilin for the next few decades of his life. After all, once she and Pei Xingyan got their divorce certificate, she would never see him again. However, when the key was presented to him, Pei Zhilin didn't even look at it, directly tossing it aside, his head held high, his tone full of disdain. I don't have the time for that. Don't talk to your mother like that. Pei Xingyan frowned, softly reprimanding his son before turning to Ruan Qingwan. He's still young, don't mind him. She remained silent, forcing a smile. He was still young. But that wasn't an excuse for him to treat his own mother this way. How little did he care about her to use the excuse of him being young every time to brush her off? While they were talking, Pei Zhilin had already run to Pei Yin, his eyes full of anticipation. Aunt, what gift did you get me? Pei Yin smiled and took out her prepared gift, a storybook. It wasn't even wrapped, obviously just something she picked up casually. But Pei Zhilin accepted it happily, his eyes crinkling with a smile. Thank you, Aunt. I love it. I'll definitely treasure it. After the gifts were given, it was time to make a wish. Pei Zhilin stood in front of the expensive cake, closed his eyes, and clasped his hands together. The next second, he opened his mouth, his childish voice reaching everyone's ears. I hope Aunt can be my mom, and be with Dad forever. After a moment of silence, the whole room became noisy. Pei Xingyan also froze before scolding, don't be ridiculous. Unafraid, Pei Zhilin blinked and pouted, refusing to back down. Doesn't Dad want to be with Aunt? I saw it in the study, your drawer is full of love letters to Aunt, and you also kept all of Aunt's photos. Every page of the book you put on the bookshelf is filled with Aunt's name. Ruan Qingwan is just a nanny, why can't you and Aunt be together? As soon as these words were spoken, Pei Yin abruptly turned to look at Pei Xingyan, tears welling up in her eyes turning red. Brother, so you never forgot about me all these years, did you? Pei Xingyan avoided her gaze awkwardly, remaining silent. But she persisted, I just want an answer, brother. As the last word fell, her tears finally streamed down her cheeks, hitting his heart heavily and completely softening it. Love poured out, and he spoke, the answer hidden deep in his heart finally unable to be contained any longer. Yes, I haven't forgotten you for a single moment. As Pei Xingyan's voice fell, the room fell into complete silence. Suddenly, a crashing sound echoed through the banquet hall. Everyone instinctively looked towards the source and discovered that someone had accidentally knocked over the champagne tower. Unfortunately, Pei Yin was standing right where it collapsed. Yin. Auntie. Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin cried out in alarm. Ruan Qingwan watched helplessly as the father and son rushed frantically towards Pei Yin, who, in her panic, had forgotten to move. Ruan Qingwan, standing to the side, became an obstacle in their path and was shoved forcefully by the two. She instantly lost her balance and fell backward. In the next second, a cascade of wine mixed with whole and broken glass rained down on her. The trickling wine soaked her hair, and her gown clung to her body. Her arms and legs were covered in bleeding wounds, stinging and leaving her utterly disheveled. The rapid blood loss made her momentarily lose consciousness. For a moment, she felt dizzy, her gaze fixed blankly ahead. Opposite her were Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin, still anxiously surrounding Pei Yin. Auntie, your hand is bleeding. Yin, I'll take you to the hospital. Without hesitation, Pei Xingyan scooped Pei Yin into his arms and strode towards the exit. Little Pei Zhilin struggled to keep up with his short legs, but didn't complain. Pei Yin's pale hand rested on Pei Xingyan's neck. On her arm, there was only a small cut, but in their eyes, it seemed like an irrecoverable injury. As they hurried past Ruan Qingwan, Pei Xingyan glanced at her subconsciously. Seeing the numerous cuts on her body, he finally remembered that he had pushed someone aside. He paused momentarily and looked at her, his voice devoid of any apology. I need to take Yin to the hospital first. You can take a taxi to get your injuries looked at. Ruan Qingwan opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Pei Xingyan and the others had already left the banquet hall. Left lying in a pool of blood, she took out her phone and with difficulty dialed 120. The ambulance arrived quickly. Just as she was about to be wheeled into the operating room on a stretcher, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin rushed back, their faces anxious. Yin has a blood clotting disorder and the bleeding won't stop. She's fainted now, and the blood bank doesn't have enough blood. I remember you have the same blood type as her. Come with me to donate blood. As he spoke, Pei Xingyan reached out to pull Ruan Qingwan. Seeing this, the doctor quickly stepped forward to stop him, his expression troubled. Mr. Pei, Mrs. Pei's injuries are more serious, and she's too weak to donate blood right now. However, these words failed to elicit any sympathy from Pei Xingyan. His brow furrowed, and he didn't stop pulling. Even Pei Zhilin just stood there pouting, his tone indifferent. What's the big deal about donating a little blood? How can she compare to Auntie? All the blood in Ruan Qingwan's body turned to ice. She turned her head shakily and met their gazes, but neither showed any remorse. Ruan Qingwan was long accustomed to their coldness, but hearing these words, her heart still ached uncontrollably. For 6 years, she had painstakingly cared for the father and son. Even if she didn't expect them to love her the way they loved Pei Yin, how could they say such things? She was dragged out of bed, stumbling all the way to the blood donation room. The needle pierced her vein, but the physical pain couldn't compare to the pain in her heart. As more and more blood was drawn, dizziness washed over her again, and her lips gradually turned pale. She couldn't bear it any longer and tried to get up and leave, but a shadow suddenly appeared before her, and her hands were firmly held down. Turning her head, she saw Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin holding her hands down, one on each side. Just a little more. It'll be safer for Yin. As soon as Pei Xingyan's voice fell, Pei Zhilin's voice followed closely. Draw more. Make sure Annie is safe. Worry and anxiety for Pei Yin were plastered all over their faces, completely ignoring the blood being drawn from Ruan Qingwan as they urged the nurse to take more. Already weak and injured, Ruan Qingwan finally couldn't take it anymore and fainted. When she woke up again, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin were rarely both at her bedside. Seeing her awake, their cold eyes held a hint of complex emotions. After a while, Pei Xingyan spoke first. I didn't know you had anemia. Why didn't you say anything? Hearing this, Ruan Qingwan couldn't help but smile bitterly. They had come straight in and started the transfusion, giving her no time to explain. Besides, would you not have let me donate blood if I had told you? Silence fell after her words. He didn't answer, but the answer was already obvious. They still would have made her donate. Just like when they dragged her to donate before, her wounds hadn't healed, and the doctor had advised against it, reminding them that she was weak and unsuitable for blood donation. I'm sorry about this. I'll give you whatever you want. His lips barely moved, and his usually cold voice finally held a trace of guilt, no longer as harsh as before. Ruan Qingwan closed her eyes and replied hoarsely, What I want most, I've already gotten. Pei Xingyan coughed lightly, his expression becoming unnatural because of her words. She was puzzled, then suddenly understood when she saw his expression. In his mind, Ruan Qingwan was still the one who loved him desperately, who would do anything for him, just to get him to look at her more. In his mind, what she wanted most was naturally him, and their marriage. But only she knew that she wasn't talking about those things. She meant freedom. After hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth again, about to say something, when a nurse pushed the door open. Miss Pei is awake. Hearing this, Pei Zhilin became restless, quickly standing up and urging Pei Xingyan. Dad, let's go. She's already fine. Why are we still here? She looks fine. There's nothing wrong with her. She just fainted to gain sympathy. Let's go see Aunt. Aunt is afraid of pain, and she lost so much blood. She must need us now. His sleeve was being tugged. Pei Xingyan helplessly got up. Reaching the door of the ward, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at her, his voice tinged with helplessness. I'll come back to see you later. With that, he turned and didn't look back. Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin, who said they would come back later, never returned. Ruan Qingwan was lying down resting when her phone suddenly chimed with a message notification. She opened it to see a picture from Pei Yin. In the photo, Pei Xingyan was holding a bowl of porridge, scooping a spoonful and feeding it to her lips, his eyes filled with a tenderness that could drown someone. In another photo, Pei Zhilin was sitting at the end of her bed, obediently massaging her legs. You saw the scene at the birthday banquet. Xingyan still has feelings for me, and your child likes me too. You're just a nanny. Just give up your place. The provocative words entered her eyes, but they didn't cause a ripple of emotion. After a pause, Ruan Qingwan typed a few words and replied, "Don't worry, soon. Soon, I will give them all to you." What do you mean? The reply came quickly, but no matter how much she asked or how many messages she bombarded her with, Ruan Qingwan didn't respond. A few days later, Ruan Qingwan fully recovered. Pei Xingyan came to pick her up on the day she was discharged. Pei Yin was also being discharged with her. After completing the discharge procedures, as they were about to get into the car, a man and a woman also walked out of the hospital and went straight to the car parked next to theirs. After putting the luggage in the back seat, the man opened the passenger door and then exaggeratedly bent down. "Wife's seat, please get in." The woman playfully hit him, but her eyes were filled with joy. Who wouldn't like such blatant favoritism? Pei Xingyan obviously heard the conversation, his hand hesitating as he opened the passenger door. Pei Yin walked forward with a smile and grabbed his free hand, then glanced at the open door, her posture intimate and natural. "Brother, did you open this for me?" He nodded, but his gaze drifted uncontrollably towards Ruan Qingwan on the other side. A whirlwind of thoughts churned in his mind. He had imagined her reactions, anger, sadness, or perhaps both. But of all the possibilities, he never expected the calm way she opened the back seat door herself. As if she hadn't heard him call it the wife's seat. Perhaps because he had told her on their wedding day that he loved someone else, and because Ruan Qingwan loved him too much, she had been obedient and compliant over the years, never fighting or vying for anything, never expecting anything from him. Just like now, knowing that his heart belonged to Pei Yin, she wouldn't insist on claiming her position as his wife in front of others. But for some reason, at this moment, Pei Xingyan felt a strange unease. "Brother, wait. I think I left my necklace in the ward. It's very important, the one you gave me for my 18th birthday." Just as she was about to get into the car, Pei Yin spoke up with a touch of annoyance, successfully drawing the attention of both Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin. Hearing this, Pei Xingyan turned and walked back towards the hospital. "I'll go find it for you. Wait here." Seeing him leave first, Pei Zhilin quickly followed. "Dad, I'll go too." Their figures gradually disappeared into the crowd. Pei Yin turned back to look at Ruan Qingwan, her chin raised, her tone disdainful. "You're quite composed. Still unwilling to leave even now." "Ruan Qingwan, if I were you, I'd tuck my tail between my legs and get lost." Ruan Qingwan didn't have time to deal with her theatrics, nor did she want to listen to her barking here. She didn't even glance at her. However, this attitude only fueled Pei Yin's anger, and she spewed out one spiteful remark after another. Ruan Qingwan continued to ignore her until the sudden crack of a slap rang out beside her ear. She turned to see a bright red handprint on Pei Yin's face. "Sister Qingwan, what happened between my brother and me is in the past. If you don't like me, I can promise not to appear in front of you again. Why did you hit me?" In the next second, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin arrived like a whirlwind, shoving her hard to the ground. Seeing Pei Yin crying, Pei Zhilin was furious. He rushed to Ruan Qingwan, who had fallen to the ground, and slapped her several times. "Just because she donated a little blood to you, you want to take revenge on my aunt like this? You're so vicious." Ruan Qingwan hadn't expected Pei Zhilin to suddenly attack, and he actually managed to hit her. Perhaps he truly hated her, because he put all his strength into those slaps, leaving her head spinning and her cheeks burning with pain. "Pei Zhilin, enough." Only after Pei Zhilin had vented his anger did Pei Xingyan stop him with a cold voice. Looking at her, his eyes were icy, devoid of any emotion. Unable to tell whether her face or her heart hurt more, she finally regained her senses enough to explain, her voice hoarse. "Pei Xingyan, Pei Zhilin, I didn't hit her. There are security cameras here. You can check them if you don't believe me." But neither father nor son paid any attention to her words. They helped Pei Yin into the car, one on each side, and drove off without a second thought, leaving her behind. Watching the car speed away, kicking up dust, she couldn't help but laugh at herself. In front of Pei Yin, how could she still think of explaining? She had been too naive. When Ruan Qingwan returned home, the house was empty. She knew that Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin were at Pei Yin's. Looking at the deserted villa, she glanced at the calendar and remembered. 3 days later, the divorce cooling-off period would end. She could finally leave them completely. She closed the video, took off the wedding ring she had worn for 6 years, and retrieved Pei Zhilin's childhood scribbles from the bedside table. She threw them all in the trash. 2 days before her departure, Ruan Qingwan received a second video. In the video, Pei Xingyan, Pei Zhilin, and Pei Yin were standing in a field of purple lavender. Pei Xingyan's eyes were filled with uncontainable love. "Yin, you said you liked lavender, so I planted this field of lavender for you. Do you like it?" She nodded shyly. Beside her, Pei Zhilin tugged at her skirt and held up a purple garland. "Auntie, I picked this for a long time. It's made of the prettiest lavender. It's for you." Ruan Qingwan calmly finished watching the video and found all the gifts she had given Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin. They were covered in dust, most of them unopened. She threw all the gifts into the fire and let them burn to ashes. On the last day of the countdown to her departure, Ruan Qingwan received the third video. In the video, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin were at an auction, showering Pei Yin with extravagant gifts. Whatever Pei Yin fancied, no matter how expensive, Pei Xingyan bought it for her. If Pei Yin even slightly frowned, Pei Zhilin would immediately warm her hands or feed her fruit. The father and son only had eyes for her. Ruan Qingwan closed the video expressionlessly, then went out to collect her divorce certificate. Upon returning, she erased every trace of herself from the house. On the day of her departure, Ruan Qingwan packed all her luggage. Just as she was about to leave, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin suddenly burst through the door. The first words they spoke upon returning were to demand an apology from her. "Today is Yin's birthday. You slapped Yin last time. You should apologize to her." Ruan Qingwan stood motionless, her expression calm, just watching the father and son. Strangely, both Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin felt their hearts begin to race, filled with an inexplicable panic. "You were in the wrong. Shouldn't you apologize?" As soon as Pei Xingyan spoke, Pei Zhilin, as if finding his backbone, clung tightly to his hand and chimed in, "That's right. You hit Auntie. You should apologize to Auntie." Ruan Qingwan simply continued to watch them, saying nothing. Just when Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin thought she would remain stubborn and refuse to budge, she suddenly turned around. "I understand. You go ahead." Pei Xingyan paused, then frowned upon hearing her words. "Aren't you coming with us? Since it's a birthday party, I need to change into a dress and put on some makeup. Don't you hate waiting? And on Pei Yin's birthday, she surely wants you to be there from the very beginning." Her expression was indifferent, her reasoning clear, leaving Pei Xingyan speechless. Pei Zhilin glanced at her a few times, then started to complain. "You cook at home every day. What's there to put makeup on for?" Ruan Qingwan paused, her eyes darkening slightly. After a moment, she looked directly at him and replied, "The slap marks you left need to be covered." Instantly, a flicker of guilt flashed through Pei Zhilin's eyes, and he dared not speak again. Feeling embarrassed, he sullenly took Pei Xingyan's hand and turned to leave. But she suddenly called out, stopping them. They turned around to see her holding out a gift box from the room. "This is the gift I prepared for Pei Yin. Please pass it on to her during the gift-giving segment. Remember, it must be played on the spot." Inside was the surveillance footage from the hospital that day. Since they refused to watch it, she would show it to everyone. Ruan Qingwan emphasized the words "on the spot." Although Pei Xingyan felt puzzled, he still agreed. After receiving the gift, the father and son turned and walked towards the door. "Pei Zhilin." She suddenly spoke, calling his name. Seeing his impatient turn, she softly uttered 2 words, "Goodbye." She paused, then looked at the tall figure beside Pei Xingyan and said the same farewell. "Pei Xingyan, goodbye." Pei Xingyan turned back. Ruan Qingwan stood beneath the light, backlit, her expression difficult to discern. He could only vaguely see a faint smile on her face. He was momentarily stunned. When did she become so thin, as if a gust of wind could blow her away? Blow her out of the Pei family, even out of his world. But after a moment, he refuted his own thoughts. Ruan Qingwan loved him so much, how could she leave? It had been 6 years, and she hadn't left. No matter who left, she wouldn't. He forcibly suppressed the inexplicable panic rising in his heart, stopped thinking, nodded, and with the gift box in one hand and Pei Zhilin's hand in the other, turned and walked out of the villa. After watching Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin leave the villa, Ruan Qingwan withdrew her gaze, turned back to her room, and pushed her already packed luggage out the villa door. She walked to the roadside, hailed a car, got in, and gave the driver her destination. The next moment, the car started, speeding away in the opposite direction of Pei Yin's villa. Pei Xingyan, Pei Zhilin. Goodbye. This goodbye meant, never see you again. On the other side, Pei Xingyan sat in the speeding car, a strange unease creeping into his heart. He kept looking back, trying to see if Ruan Qingwan was following. His gaze fell on the gift box, and he couldn't help but frown. Even the gift had to be delivered by him. How late did she intend to be? Just changing clothes and putting on makeup, did it really need to take so long? He started searching his memory, trying to recall how long it usually took her to get ready. He kept thinking that if it didn't normally take this long, then she must be trying to avoid apologizing. He wouldn't let her get away with it. But thinking back carefully, in their 6 years of marriage, she rarely wore makeup. Perhaps, as Pei Zhilin had said, she spent her days cooking and taking care of them at home. Or perhaps she simply didn't enjoy dressing up. He truly couldn't recall how long it took her to put on makeup. Finally, the car stopped. Pei Zhilin waited for a long time, but seeing no movement from Pei Xingyan, he fumbled with the car door and jumped out first. Seeing that his father still hadn't moved, he climbed back in and tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, we're here. We're going to see Aunt." After calling several times, the person in the car still didn't react. Pei Zhilin raised his voice, making it a bit shrill. Pei Xingyan finally came to his senses. Looking at the villa gate outside the window, he realized they had arrived at Pei Yin's villa. He got out of the car, holding the gift box, feeling somewhat lost. "Dad, what were you thinking about, so lost in thought?" Pei Zhilin held his hand, wrinkling his nose in displeasure. Hearing this question, Pei Xingyan suddenly realized that throughout the entire journey, he seemed to have only thought of one person, Ruan Qingwan. She had actually managed to make him so restless. A strange feeling flickered in Pei Xingyan's heart. Seeing him lost in thought again, Pei Zhilin tugged at his hand to express his dissatisfaction. Pei Xingyan abruptly shook his head. "Nothing." His answer was perfunctory, but fortunately, Pei Zhilin was preoccupied with seeing Pei Yin and didn't dwell on it. But for some reason, ever since seeing Ruan Qingwan, his heart had been pounding, and he felt uneasy, as if something had been ripped from his heart. He wanted to grasp it, but he couldn't. Even after arriving at the banquet hall and seeing Pei Yin, this feeling didn't diminish at all. He frequently glanced towards the entrance and kept checking the time. The longer it went, the more anxious he became. Pei Yin noticed his anxiety, but didn't know its source. After thinking about it, however, only the most improbable possibility remained. A vicious glint flashed in her eyes. Since Ruan Qingwan was so stubborn, refusing to step aside after being told so many times, and even daring to use tricks to make her presence felt in front of Pei Xingyan, then later, she would give her another gift. Pei Yin raised her head, resuming her sweet smile, and walked over to Pei Xingyan in her gown. "Brother, you seem so restless. Qingwan hasn't arrived yet. Did something urgent come up for her? If you're worried, you can go find her first. It's okay if you don't stay with me for my birthday." She put on an understanding and well-behaved appearance, but her tone couldn't hide her grievance, making people feel exciting, a mix of heartache and sympathy, for her, enough to put everything else aside. Pei Xingyan's heart softened, and his expression unconsciously gentled. What could possibly happen to her? "It's your birthday, of course I have to be here with you." Pei Zhilin also smiled and moved closer to her. "That's right, Aunt. Nothing is more important than your birthday. Don't worry, we won't leave today. When that woman arrives, we'll make her apologize to you in public." It wasn't the first time Pei Zhilin hadn't called Ruan Qingwan Mom. In fact, it was a result of his own indulgence. But for some reason, hearing Pei Zhilin refer to Ruan Qingwan as that woman at this moment, a surge of displeasure arose in his heart. He was about to scold him, but seeing the harmonious scene between Pei Yin and Pei Zhilin, the words became stuck in his throat, unable to come out, making him extremely uncomfortable. After a while, he sighed. "Let's go to the banquet hall." The birthday banquet quickly reached the gift-giving segment. One priceless gift after another was presented to Pei Yin, greatly satisfying her vanity. When it was Pei Xingyan's turn, he thought for a moment and decided to present Ruan Qingwan's gift first. "This is a gift from Qingwan. She said it must be played on the spot, so let's see hers first." Opening the gift box revealed a small USB drive inside. He took it out and handed it to a servant to play. Pei Yin didn't stop him. She also wanted to see what tricks Ruan Qingwan was trying to pull in the situation. She held her head high, a hint of disdain in her eyes, until the large screen in the middle of the banquet hall suddenly lit up, attracting the attention of all the guests. As the loading bar gradually approached 100%, not only Pei Yin, but everyone was curious about what Ruan Qingwan, who had been clinging to Pei Xingyan for 6 years, would show at the birthday banquet of his true love. Was it their loving past? But there was no love between them. Everyone in Nanjing knew that the CEO of the Pei Corporation loved his adopted sister, and his marriage to his wife was just a business arrangement. Or was it really a congratulatory message? Then they would probably just laugh at her pretense of generosity. The long loading time ended, and the image finally appeared on the big screen. It looked like a surveillance camera view. What is this? It looks like surveillance footage. What is Ruan Qingwan doing with surveillance footage? While everyone was discussing what Ruan Qingwan was up to, Pei Yin's face suddenly changed when she saw the familiar scene. This was the surveillance video from the day she framed Ruan Qingwan for hitting her in the hospital's underground parking lot. Pei Xingyan didn't recognize it at first. But soon, he saw himself and Pei Zhilin appearing with Pei Yin and Ruan Qingwan. It hadn't been long since the incident. Both Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin were still thinking about making Ruan Qingwan apologize to Pei Yin for what happened that day. Now, with the familiar scene flashing before their eyes, father and son instantly understood. Turn it off. Turn it off quickly. Pei Yin suddenly screamed, grabbing a wine glass and throwing it at the screen. Wait. The servants present were startled by her behavior and were about to turn off the screen when Pei Xingyan stopped them. Pei Zhilin also looked at Pei Yin in confusion, wondering why she was so agitated. Neither Pei Xingyan nor Pei Zhilin had ever doubted the truth of that day. In their hearts, Pei Yin was gentle and kind, so how could she frame someone? Therefore, when they saw this surveillance video, their first reaction was anger. They were angry that they just wanted an apology from Ruan Qingwan, and she wanted to make this a public spectacle. But what good would it do her to make a big deal out of it? Pei Zhilin didn't think too much about it. Although still puzzled, he patiently tried to comfort Pei Yin, and, don't be afraid. If she wants to make a big deal out of it, let her. Does she really think she can ruin your birthday banquet? What wishful thinking. Since she wants to show it, let everyone see how vicious she is. He spoke angrily, completely oblivious to the strange expressions on the faces of Pei Xingyan and the other guests behind him. Who would use their own reputation as a stepping stone to ruin a birthday party? Sure enough, the video quickly played to the point where Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin left one after another. The camera remained focused on Pei Yin and Ruan Qingwan. Because of the distance, the sound was somewhat distorted. But Pei Yin's shrill voice clearly reached everyone present. You're really calm. You're still not willing to leave even now. Ruan Qingwan, if I were you, I'd tuck my tail between my legs and get lost. If I hadn't been sent abroad for those few years, do you think you would be sitting in the position of Mrs. Pei? Look at your face, look at your clothes, a frumpy housewife. What makes you think you can compete with me? Harsh and provocative words came one after another. The video didn't show Ruan Qingwan's expression clearly, but it did expose Pei Yin's distorted face perfectly. Before Ruan Qingwan could react, there was an uproar from those watching the screen. Who would have thought that Pei Yin, who always presented herself as a sophisticated heiress in public, was actually a mistress who had forced out the original wife and was now flaunting her victory? But what surprised them even more was that Pei Yin suddenly slapped herself in the face. A red mark quickly appeared on her fair face, and her tearful appearance was particularly pitiful as she accusingly asked Ruan Qingwan why she had hit her. The next second, Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin finally returned. Hearing these words and seeing the slap mark on Pei Yin's face, they erupted in fury. One pushed Ruan Qingwan to the ground, the other slapped his own mother 10 times. Finally, when Ruan Qingwan explained that she hadn't touched Pei Yin and that there was surveillance footage to prove it, the three of them simply walked away, none of them listening to a word she said. The murmurs suddenly ceased, and all eyes fell on Pei Xingyan, Pei Zhilin, and Pei Yin. The Pei group was the leading family in Nanjing, and most of the people present relied on the Pei family for their businesses and families. They could gossip about the Pei family's adopted daughter, but they couldn't challenge the CEO and future heir of the Pei group in such a setting. However, most of them still held a hint of disdain in their eyes. They looked down on Pei Yin for her mistress behavior, and naturally, they also despised Pei Xingyan for resorting to violence based on Pei Yin's one-sided story, and Pei Zhilin for slapping his own mother based on a false accusation. The three members of the Pei family, under everyone's scrutiny, were all flushed. Among them, Pei Xingyan felt particularly embarrassed. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but after looking around and not seeing the person he wanted to see, he finally remembered. Oh, right, she hadn't arrived yet, so she had asked him to deliver this gift on her behalf. A wave of guilt washed over him, and he stammered, "I didn't know, I thought it was." Beside him, Pei Zhilin was already dumbfounded. Pei Zhilin hated Ruan Qingwan and even resented the fact that she was his biological mother. Because his father had said that after his grandfather sent his true love abroad, he sent Ruan Qingwan to him and forced them to marry. He said he was forced to marry Ruan Qingwan. He said his true love was his kind and innocent adopted sister, thousands of miles away, but their relationship was not accepted by society, so he had no choice but to give in. Pei Zhilin thought that Ruan Qingwan was a thief, a robber, who had forced herself into the relationship between his father and aunt. If it weren't for Ruan Qingwan, his mother would be his kind and innocent aunt. But it wasn't until this video was made public that he realized his understanding of good and evil seemed to have suddenly collapsed. So that day, she didn't hit aunt? He looked up blankly at his longtime support, only to see the same confusion in Pei Xingyan's eyes. How could this be? How could the truth be like this? Pei Xingyan suddenly looked up, his gaze locking onto Pei Yin, who was trying to quietly slip away. As if he had finally found a breakthrough, all his anger poured out in an instant. Why did you lie? I trusted you so much, Pei Yin. How did you become like this? His face was filled with grief and indignation, and Pei Zhilin immediately echoed, "Yes, aunt, why did you lie to us? Haven't we been good enough to you?" Seeing that they were all blaming her, Pei Yin's face was full of disbelief. But remembering the surrounding guests, she held back her anger and cried pitifully. No, it's not like that. Please listen to my explanation." Clap, clap, clap. Suddenly, a burst of applause rang out from below the stage, startling the guests. They couldn't help but scan the room, trying to identify the audacious person who dared to clap at this moment. Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin were equally stunned for a moment, turning to look at the source of the sound. The man stood up, eyes slightly narrowed, filled with amusement, a smirk playing on his lips. His voice dripped with mockery as he spoke. "I must thank this Mrs. Pei for putting on such a good show for us. Xing Qijiao." Pei Xingyan's face stiffened, his anger intensifying as he recognized the man. In that instant, what surged through his mind, besides the fury at Pei Yin's deception, was resentment towards Ruan Qingwan for making such a public scene. Why couldn't she have explained things to him privately? Why did she have to choose such a decisive way to humiliate them in public? No one offered him an explanation. As for the other guests, upon seeing who the speaker was, a sense of understanding dawned on them. The Pei family had few rivals in Nanqing, but the Xing family was one of them. Xing Qijiao, in particular, had always clashed with Pei Xingyan since childhood, constantly antagonizing him and taking pleasure in his misfortune. Under such circumstances, he was indeed the only one who would dare to do such a thing. Having watched the drama unfold, Xing Qijiao turned and strolled out of the banquet hall, not giving Pei Xingyan a chance to react. With the banquet in such disarray and Xing Qijiao leading the exodus, the other guests didn't dare to linger. They made excuses and departed, leaving the once bustling banquet hall empty within moments, save for Pei Xingyan, Pei Zhilin, and Pei Yin. The banquet was over, yet she hadn't appeared. It was clear she had deliberately avoided them and the event. By now, Pei Xingyan understood they had been played by Ruan Qingwan. Overwhelmed by rage, and with only the three of them remaining, Pei Xingyan's heartache vanished, replaced by a surge of malice in his eyes. He raised his hand, and a crisp slap echoed through the room. Caught off guard by the forceful blow, Pei Yin's head snapped to the side. After a moment of stunned silence, intense disbelief flooded her features. "You hit me? Pei Xingyan, you hit me." Tears of genuine grievance welled up in her eyes. This time, they weren't an act. Meeting her accusing gaze, any lingering tenderness in Pei Xingyan's heart evaporated. "I saw you slap yourself earlier. I assumed you enjoyed being hit." He offered a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. As his words fell, Pei Zhilin suddenly lunged forward, tears streaming down his face, hitting Pei Yin with all his might. She cried out in pain, but he showed no mercy. "You liar. You're a bad woman." He seemed to have forgotten the words he had spoken at his birthday party just a short while ago, expressing his desire for his aunt to become his mother and for her to be with his father forever. After all, as the only son of the Pei Corporation's CEO, he was most likely to inherit the company. He had always been flattered and fawned over. When had he ever been looked at with such disdain? Finally, Unable to bear the pain any longer, Pei Yin shoved him with all her might. He was only a 5-year-old child, no match for the strength of an adult. He was immediately thrown back. Breathing heavily, Pei Yin clutched a nearby table and struggled to her feet. Looking at the father and son, their faces filled with loathing and hatred, she suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Pei Xingyan's brow furrowed tightly, his voice filled with disgust. Amidst the disgust, there was a hint of panic. Recently, Ruan Qingwan's change had been drastic. In the past, even if she was angry, she wouldn't air their dirty laundry in public, let alone the fact that she had barely shown any anger in the past year. Just like that time, even when he admitted in front of everyone that he hadn't forgotten Pei Yin, she just stood there silently, not saying a word. She loved him so much, how could she do something that damaged her own reputation? "What am I laughing at?" Seeing his frown, Pei Yin laughed even louder. "I'm laughing at your hypocrisy, laughing at how you and your father are equally despicable." She viciously cursed them, then laughed self-deprecatingly. "I'm also laughing at myself, for actually believing that people like you could have genuine feelings. Did I tell you to believe everything I said without question? Pei Xingyan, look at me. We used to love each other so much. So what if I framed her? She's just someone you married for convenience, a nanny. Do you have to treat me like this for her?" Pei Zhilin wanted to retort, but didn't know how, so he looked helplessly at Pei Xingyan, hoping he could offer some guidance. "She's not just someone I married for convenience, and she's definitely not a nanny." "Right, you're not allowed to talk about mom like that." Pei Xingyan subconsciously refuted Pei Yin's words, and after he spoke, Pei Zhilin echoed his sentiment, appearing quite indignant. But seeing Pei Yin's surprised and mocking expression, father and son suddenly realized something. These words were the very evaluation of Ruan Qingwan that they themselves had uttered. Yes, they were the ones who said it, so why did they find it so jarring to hear it from someone else? "Pei Xingyan, don't tell me you're actually saying you've fallen in love with Ruan Qingwan? And you, Pei Zhilin, what kind of filial son are you pretending to be now? Do you really think everyone has forgotten how you said on your birthday that Ruan Qingwan was just a nanny and that you and your dad were a match made in heaven?" A flicker of confusion crossed Pei Xingyan's mind. Had he fallen in love with Ruan Qingwan? Looking at the equally bewildered Pei Zhilin beside him, he opened his mouth, but in the end, remained silent. No. Pei Zhilin's voice was choked with tears welling up in his eyes. He looked up at Pei Xingyan, seeking validation. "I was just tricked by you. You lied and made us think mom was bullying you. That's why we hated her." His words, initially fragmented, gradually became righteous, and his emotions surged again. He picked up a shard of glass from the floor and threw it viciously at her. Pei Yin instinctively closed her eyes. In that instant, a sharp pain shot through the corner of her eye. She reached up to touch it, only to feel a wet, warm stickiness. Pei Yin was rushed to the hospital, but neither Pei Xingyan nor Pei Zhilin spared her a glance. They hurried home. Too many questions swirled in their minds. They were waiting to ask Ruan Qingwan. But when they pushed open the villa door, the house was empty. Where was she? Father and son searched the bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and backyard, only to discover that not only was Ruan Qingwan missing, but everything related to her was gone. "Dad, has mom abandoned us?" After a long search that yielded nothing, Pei Zhilin pouted, tugging on Pei Xingyan's suit jacket, on the verge of tears. Pei Xingyan had no time to comfort him. His heart was in complete turmoil. He didn't know what to do or what he should do. He could only repeatedly dial the unlabeled number in his contacts. But it didn't connect. He had been blocked. Pei Xingyan watched as the call ended after a mechanical female voice, staring at the number, the digits becoming ingrained in his memory after countless attempts. Just then, his phone suddenly rang. Pei Xingyan excitedly looked at the screen, but his excitement plummeted when he saw the caller ID, Grandpa. Old Master Pei, oblivious to everything, asked in a deep voice, "Agnes gone?" He remained silent for a long while, offering no reply. Even without an answer, Old Master Pei already knew the truth. A month had passed since the contract ended, and the uproar at Pei Yin's birthday banquet had reached his ears. Ruan Qingwan's departure was well within his expectations. He sighed heavily, his voice filled with exasperation. "I told you before, you and Pei Yin have no future. You're not suitable, no matter how you look at it. When you agreed to marry Agwen and had a child with her, I thought you had finally let go of Pei Yin, but Pei Xingyan, you've truly disappointed me." Pei Xingyan frowned, his irritation growing with his grandfather's rambling. Just as he was about to hang up, he caught something unusual in his grandfather's words. His eyes narrowed, his voice turning cold. You knew Ruan Qingwan left? Did you force her to leave? Where did you hide her? His questioning grew more frantic, his emotions spiraling out of control. The pain of being separated from his beloved 6 years ago washed over him like a tidal wave. Eyes bloodshot, he vented all his emotions on old Master Pei, completely unaware that Pei Zhilin, who had been holding his hand, had slipped away, his eyes filled with terror. Pei Zhilin had never seen his father like this. To him, Pei Xingyan was the calm and collected CEO, the sharply dressed business elite, the loving father who hid his affections deep within. He was never this person with bloodshot eyes, losing control for the umpteenth time, even taking his anger out on his grandfather. He turned and quietly ran out of the villa. He wouldn't stay here and wait passively. He was going to find his mother. He didn't want this father anymore. Lost in his own emotions, Pei Xingyan didn't notice any of this. Old Master Pei had indeed driven away his beloved in the past, leaving a lingering guilt in his heart. But now, having driven away his own love himself, leaving old Master Pei with no room to intervene, he wouldn't protect him. This time she left on her own. Or perhaps, Pei Xingyan, it's you who doesn't understand love, doesn't know how to respect others, that's why you drove her away. Don't tell me you think Agwen stayed with you all these years because she loved you? What do you mean? Pei Xingyan froze, instinctively asking, while his subconscious screamed, don't listen, Pei Xingyan, you won't be able to handle the answer. He frantically tried to press the end call button, but old Master Pei seemed to have anticipated his thoughts, revealing the whole truth. Agwen never loved you. She was only there to repay a debt. I sent her to you, to get close to you, to pretend to love you, to bear your child, to make you forget Pei Yin. I heard Pei Yin was injured today, and you didn't even go see her. Old Master Pei chuckled again, giving him no chance to reply. It seems that child completed her mission quite well. Before she left, she told me to allow you to be with Pei Yin. I agreed. So from now on, whatever happens between you and Pei Yin, I won't interfere. But looking at it now, it seems you don't need my interference. The schadenfreude in old Master Pei's voice was so thick that Pei Xingyan couldn't pretend not to hear it. His face contorted, but he still refused to give in, gritting his teeth. I don't believe you. You're lying to me. Believe it or not. Hearing him say this, old Master Pei didn't care at all. Yet, it was precisely old Master Pei's casual attitude that dispelled some of the doubt in his heart, leaving only boundless panic. Ruan Qingwan had never loved him. Looking at the thin contract with the black and white agreement, this thought hit Pei Xingyan like a blow to the head, making him feel as if he had instantly lost all his strength, his eyes vacant. So, are you satisfied with this truth? Old Master Pei was still sitting in the pearwood chair, taking a small sip of hot tea. The rising steam blurred Pei Xingyan's expression. He remained seated, motionless, like a lifeless object. After all, he was his cherished grandson. Old Master Pei didn't reveal all this to make him repeat the mistakes of 6 years ago, becoming distraught over a woman. Instead, he wanted to completely awaken him, to make him understand that feelings were just external things, a mix of truth and falsehood. They could exist, but there was no need to be too stubborn or persistent about them. Speaking again, old Master Pei resumed his usual earnest tone, but listening closely, one could still detect some heartfelt concern. Xingyan, it's not that Grandpa wants to discourage you, but your words and actions were too extreme in the past. One must cherish everything in front of them, whether it's people or other things. No one will truly stay in place and wait for you forever. I hid it from you before because I was afraid you wouldn't be able to accept it. But if Pei Yin had been firm in her decision, instead of panicking and choosing to take the money and flee abroad when I proposed that if she insisted on being with you, she would have to give up everything the Pei family provided her, I could have easily. Just like I'm letting go now and no longer interfering with your relationship with her, arranged a suitable identity for her to marry into the Pei family at that time. But you misjudged her and even planned to give up your status as the heir of the Pei group for such a woman. As for Ruan Qingwan, if you had shown her even the slightest bit of sincerity in these past 6 years, I don't believe she would have been so heartless as to ignore 6 years of companionship and abandon the child she carried for 10 months. Ultimately, you are the one who wronged her. If I were you, what I would do now is definitely not wallow in self-pity here, but go find her, explain, and try to win her back. Pei Zhilin hid by the door, listening to the conversation between old Master Pei and Pei Xingyan. The long string of words was a little too much for his young age to process. After struggling to understand, the only thing left in his mind was that one sentence. Ultimately, you're the one who wronged her. That's why she so heartlessly abandoned the child she carried for 10 months. So it was Dad who wronged Mom. Not like Dad said, that if it wasn't for Mom, the person with him now should be Pei Yin. So all along, it was him who had wrongly blamed Mom. It was him who, for someone else, had hurt the mother who should have loved him the most in the world. Tears instantly filled Pei Zhilin's eyes. He hurriedly ran away, perhaps too panicked, forgetting for a moment that he was eavesdropping. When he turned, he bumped into the doorknob. With a click, the door was pushed open slightly. In the study, old Master Pei looked towards the door and saw only a small dark figure darting away. He seemed to remember something and sighed. This child, Zhilin, following you, he has learned to disregard etiquette and filial piety, speaking ill of his mother, and now he's even learned to eavesdrop. From now on, he'll stay with me, and I'll personally teach him. Old Master Pei made the decision on his own. This time, Pei Xingyan didn't object. He only stood up abruptly when Old Master Pei called for someone to follow Pei Zhilin and left without a word. 5 years later, at Beijing Airport, Ruan Qingwan was dressed in a wool coat, large sunglasses covering most of her face, concealing all her emotions. Only her rapidly alternating steps betrayed her inner turmoil. Behind her, Xing Qizha followed closely, pulling a large suitcase. Hey, wait for me, Awan. Xing Qizha didn't lower his voice at all. His call didn't stop the fuming Ruan Qingwan in front, but it did stop a man who brushed past her. He turned abruptly, his eyes full of surprise, even disbelief. Was it a namesake, or was it really her? 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. He unconsciously scrutinized the woman's figure. 6 years of marriage, and they had no photos together. The gifts she had given him and Pei Zhilin had all been cleared away by her later. In the huge villa, he had searched countless times, finally giving up and accepting the fact. When she left, she erased all traces of her existence, leaving him with nothing. Now, 5 years had passed, and he had almost forgotten what Ruan Qingwan looked like. Therefore, when they passed each other just now, he hadn't recognized her. Only after hearing the name, Awan, was he reminded. Looking at the figure again, the more he looked, the more she resembled Ruan Qingwan. Surprise struck him. When he spoke, his voice momentarily failed him, Awan. After 5 years of separation, Ruan Qingwan still recognized his voice the second he spoke. Pei Xingyan. The man who had been married to her for 6 years, bringing her 6 years of lingering nightmares. Her steps faltered slightly, and Xing Qizha, dragging the suitcase, caught up. Catching a glimpse of Pei Xingyan standing there, stunned, he instinctively rolled his eyes at him. Before Pei Xingyan could react, Xing Qizha had put his arm around Ruan Qingwan's waist and led her towards the airport exit. Awan, don't be mad. I booked a table at Shixianggu. Shall we go eat later? Hearing the name of her favorite restaurant, Shixianggu, Ruan Qingwan's anger had mostly subsided. She was still a little sulky, playing hard to get, but she didn't shake him off, tacitly agreeing to his arrangement. They both tacitly pretended not to know Pei Xingyan and left directly. He hurried after them, but when he saw this scene, he froze. He finally realized that the two were clearly close. He couldn't tell whether he was angry or heartbroken. Before his mind could react, his body made the choice for him. Awan, wait. Pei Xingyan's intention was to stop Ruan Qingwan, but after he called out, he found that the two in front were walking faster and faster, and finally, they started running. He watched helplessly as Ruan Qingwan and Xing Qizha got into a car without any hesitation. The car sped away the moment the door closed, leaving him in a cloud of dust. He dropped his hand helplessly. His phone rang, and the voice of his business partner came through, puzzled. Mr. Pei? Mr. Pei? Are you listening to me? By the time Pei Xingyan came back to his senses, the other end had already hung up. He ignored it, swiping his finger across the screen and dialing another number. Find out where Xing Qizha has been all these years, what he's been doing, and when. He got in touch with Awan. Assistant who was initially puzzled by Pei Xingyan's sudden interest in Xing Qizha, but when he heard the last sentence, his heart skipped a beat and he quickly agreed. Ruan Qingwan's whereabouts were confidential, but Xing Qizha's weren't. After 5 years of searching without a trace, 3 hours later, all the information assistant who sent landed in Pei Xingyan's hands. Ruan Qingwan met Xing Qizha 2 years ago. Like other researchers at the institute, she spent most of her time in the lab, only venturing out when the professor, worried about their well-being, forced them to take breaks by locking the lab doors and windows. Otherwise, aside from accepting awards, they rarely left. 2 years ago, while traveling abroad with her senior colleagues, she got separated from the group. While waiting for their return, she unexpectedly encountered Xing Qizhao. He approached casually, then paused, seemingly stunned when he saw her face. Ruan Qingwan, noticing his stare, instinctively became wary. She didn't say much, just carefully distanced herself. When her colleagues returned, she cautiously warned them about him. They questioned him, but his answers were vague, only claiming to know her. Since Ruan Qingwan insisted she didn't know him, they assumed he had ill intentions and reported him to the local police. Looking back, it could be considered a case of meeting through a mishap. After the misunderstanding was cleared up, their paths crossed more frequently. From the beginning, he showed a strong interest in her. The professor approved of his occasional invitations, even expressing some frustration with her other colleagues for their lack of initiative. Xing Qizhao maintained a perfect balance, neither overwhelming her with attention nor being too distant, allowing her feelings to fade. Everything seemed to fall into place. He chose a snowy evening for his confession. Fireworks illuminated the night sky, reflecting off the pristine white snow. There were no onlookers. He held flowers, knelt on one knee. In that moment, she felt as if they were the only two people in the world. "Agwen, I like you. Will you be with me?" He gave her ample room to refuse, yet the moment wasn't lacking in ceremony. She looked at him, hesitating to take the flowers. "I've been married. I have a child." She lowered her gaze, her voice slightly hoarse. Xing Qizhao heard the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Why would you like me?" Xing Qizhao had carefully considered this question before deciding to confess. Unlike Pei Xingyan, Xing Qizhao had known Ruan Qingwan's identity from the moment she appeared by Pei Xingyan's side. She wasn't an admirer, nor a marriage prospect arranged by Pei's grandfather. She was someone who willingly signed a 6-year contract with the Pei family out of gratitude. He watched from the sidelines as she diligently cared for Pei Xingyan for 6 years, bore him a child, and strived to be a good wife and mother. Even when Pei Xingyan fell in love with his former adopted sister and Ruan Qingwan was repeatedly framed, she never seemed to consider leaving. He thought she had truly fallen in love with Pei Xingyan. Back then, he felt a sense of regret and something akin to envy. He envied Pei Xingyan for having a grandfather who looked out for him and a wife who loved him. It wasn't until the commotion at Pei Yin's birthday party that he finally understood. He had been narrow-minded all along. When he saw her again, she had shed the silence and submissiveness she displayed around Pei Xingyan. Simply standing there, she was captivating. He was drawn to her, unconsciously approaching, his interest piqued. Now, he was certain of his feelings. It wasn't a fleeting whim, nor a childish desire to compete with Pei Xingyan. It was because, in this moment, she was herself and only herself. "Agwen, I know everything. And because I know everything, I also know that my feelings for you won't change because of anything else. Everything I'm doing now is simply because I like you." The sincerity in his eyes made it impossible for her to refuse. Because of that 6-year contract, because Pei Xingyan never opened his heart to her, because of the child she carried for 10 months, whose attitude towards her shifted from indifference to dislike. She had even doubted at one point whether she was suited for family life. But now, looking into his eyes, she suddenly felt that perhaps she could try again. The worst outcome would just be retracing her steps. So she reached out and took the flowers he offered, 99 red roses, even more eye-catching in the snowy night. The corners of her mouth curved into a smile, so captivating that he was momentarily lost in a daze. Everything fell into place so naturally. She accepted his confession, becoming his official girlfriend. Afterward, every time she appeared, there were traces of him by her side. And today happened to be the first anniversary of Ruan Qingwan and Xing Qizhao's relationship. She had been angry just moments ago because she learned that in order to make time for their anniversary, Xing Qizhao had worked several all-nighters to finish all his work before coming to Beijing to celebrate with her. Ultimately, Ruan Qingwan was just distressed for Xing Qizhao. Looking at the text and photos sent by his assistant, the vibrant Ruan Qingwan in them was completely different from how she was when she was with him. Pei Xingyan felt an indescribable complexity in his heart, like an overturned vinegar jar, the sourness overwhelming. What made it even harder to accept was that Xing Qizhao was now her official boyfriend, while he was nothing. He opened the glove compartment and took out the purplish-red divorce certificate. Never had he regretted so much why he had given Ruan Qingwan that signed divorce agreement when they got married, why he had never thought of settling down and living a good life with her during those 6 years, why after Pei Yin returned to the country, he not only drifted away himself, but also took Pei Zhilin with him, alienating them from her. Otherwise, how could he have finally waited until he saw her again, only to find that he couldn't even find an excuse to meet her, and she had already let go of the past and started a new life? Ruan Qingwan was completely unaware of Pei Xingyan's inner turmoil. At this moment, she was sitting in a private room at Gu, enjoying the personal service of the CEO of Xing Group. The freshly cooked ingredients were still steaming. Wrapped in the hot pot dipping sauce Xing Qizha had personally prepared, one bite dispelled the chill from her body and satisfied her enough to mercifully pick up a piece of meat, cook it, and dip it in the sauce before feeding it to him. Xing Qizha readily accepted, taking a bite directly from her chopsticks, his gaze never leaving her. She blushed slightly under his gaze and playfully slapped him. "Eat properly. What are you looking at me for?" "Because you're beautiful." Even after being hit, he didn't look away, still smiling mischievously. His infuriating expression made Ruan Qingwan's hand itch to hit him again. She clenched her fist, but after thinking about it, she decided against it. She was afraid he would enjoy it too much. Disappointed, a hint of regret flashed in Xing Qizhao's eyes. This made Ruan Qingwan even more glad that she hadn't hit him again. The two of them ate while playfully bickering, and an hour had passed before they knew it. Just as they were about to get up, the door to the private room suddenly opened. Ruan Qingwan instinctively frowned, assuming it was a waiter. She was about to ask why they hadn't knocked when she looked up and met Pei Xingyan's gaze at the door. Beside him was Pei Zhilin, who had now grown to his waist. 5 years had passed, and he had grown from a little bean into a young boy. His appearance had changed a lot, and his overall temperament had become more reserved, no longer as boisterous and precocious as before. Even without deliberately paying attention, Ruan Qingwan would always hear about them from various sources, some saying that Pei Xingyan was deeply in love with his wife, others saying that Pei Zhilin was intelligent, showing glimpses of his father's shadow at a young age. She always remained noncommittal about these rumors, and at such times, there would always be someone who remembered how they had listened to the one-sided words of others, condemning and even hurting Ruan Qingwan. Deep affection? People like them just twist things to their liking, just like how they pushed aside the first wife for the adopted sister. As for the younger one, he's just like his father, blindly believing everything that mistress says, even slapping his own mother for her. But didn't I hear that the adopted sister, the one who made them both go crazy, didn't end up marrying into the Pei family? She didn't even keep her status as an adopted daughter. Who knows what they're thinking? They pushed away the first wife to be with that person, but after she stepped aside as they wanted, they kicked her out. It was only now, seeing each other face to face instead of through a screen, that Ruan Qingwan truly felt the passage of time. Pei Zhilin had grown up so much. Xing Qizha noticed her distraction. He squeezed the hand he was holding and moved from across from her to sit beside her. His other arm went around her shoulder, pulling her closer. The entire sequence of actions screamed possessiveness. Looking up, his eyes were full of provocation. Ruan Qingwan didn't stop him. Instead, she looked away from Pei Zhilin and obediently leaned closer to Xing Qizha. This small gesture instantly brought tears to Pei Zhilin's eyes. He pouted, his eyes filled with grievance. "Mom, I miss you so much. Why haven't you come to see me all these years?" He cried like a child abandoned by his mother, pitiful and helpless. The passing crowd quickly noticed the commotion and began to stare. Pei Xingyan, acutely aware of the gazes, led Pei Zhilin into a private room and closed the door, shutting out all the onlookers. As soon as they entered, Pei Zhilin instinctively lunged towards Ruan Qingwan, but Xing Qizhao quickly intercepted him. Hey, what are you doing? Talk, don't get physical. She's my mom. Why can't I go near her?" Pei Zhilin glared at him angrily, his words full of righteous indignation. Since learning of Ruan Qingwan's whereabouts, he had rushed to Beijing nonstop, afraid that if he was too slow, he would lose her again. 5 years with old man Pei had taught him a lot: concealment, disguise, he had mastered them all. Just like he had fooled old man Pei with his obedient facade, then boarded a private jet straight to Beijing. Along the way, Pei Zhilin imagined many reunion scenarios. He imagined Ruan Qingwan regretting leaving him, imagined her still angry, but as long as he apologized properly, she would forgive him. But no. Ruan Qingwan remained where she was, subtly avoiding his approach, then slowly shook her head. "I'm not your mother, Pei Zhilin." Have you forgotten who you personally chose as your mother? Pei Zhilin's face instantly paled. Pei Xingyan quickly stepped forward and took his hand, his voice laced with disapproval. Ruan, I know you resent us, but the child is still young. He didn't understand things before and did and said some wrong things, but isn't the most important thing about a person the ability to change? Why say such hurtful things to a child? Ruan Qingwan finally looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time since their reunion. Mr. Pei, we're divorced. Our relationship isn't close enough to address each other by nicknames. Please call me Miss Ruan from now on. Otherwise, my boyfriend will be jealous. She drew a line between them with her indifferent and distant attitude. The seemingly casual words, my boyfriend, hit him like a hammer. Pei Xingyan wasn't just learning about their relationship, but the impact of words on paper was nothing compared to hearing it from her directly. Her expression was calm. For a moment, he was almost seeing their past, only their positions were reversed. Back then, he was the one in the dominant position in their relationship. Back then, Pei Xingyan was just as aloof. Faced with Qingwan, who was content with just a marriage certificate and a wedding ring, forgoing even a wedding ceremony or honeymoon, he condescendingly presented a signed divorce agreement, telling her, I know you like me, but I already have someone else in my heart. I only married you because my family was pressuring me. I've already signed this divorce agreement. Whenever you want a divorce, just sign it. You can leave anytime. He spoke so frankly then, probably never imagining that one day, he would be the one begging for reconciliation. Time changes everything, and he finally understood how she felt back then. Thinking of this, Pei Xingyan suddenly gave a self-deprecating laugh. No, how could Ruan Qingwan have been heartbroken back then? Divorce was so troublesome. She only agreed to marry him to repay the Pei family for funding her education, linking her fate to his. He gave her the freedom to leave. She must have been happy then. Pei Xingyan opened his mouth, only to find his throat tight, unable to utter a word. After all, from the very beginning, she had excluded him and Pei Zhilin from her world. Mommy, are you really not going to want me anymore? Pei Zhilin was still unwilling to give up, wanting to ask more, but Ruan Qingwan was already annoyed. She directly took Xing Qijiao's hand and stood up, about to walk past them. In the next second, Pei Zhilin clung to her leg, crying loudly, Mommy, I know I was wrong. I was bad before. I'm sorry, Mommy. Please give me another chance. I swear I'll listen to you from now on and be a good son to you. Don't abandon me, okay? Pei Xingyan also quickly blocked her path, the corners of his eyes reddening. Ruan, it was my fault. I didn't recognize my own feelings and took advantage of your love to hurt you repeatedly. No, it wasn't love. I only heard from Grandpa later that you only came to me out of gratitude. Ruan, Zhilin and I know we were wrong. Can you forgive us and give us another chance to start over? This time, you don't have to love us. As long as you're willing to come back to us, Zhilin and I will do anything you want. Pei Zhilin quickly nodded, echoing, Mommy, I found the key to the safe you gave me 5 years ago. I saw everything inside. There were numbers written on them. Were those birthday presents you prepared for me in advance? I was very good. I only opened one every year. You couldn't bear to leave me, right? Come back to us, okay? He blinked, looking pitiful and aggrieved. Hearing Pei Zhilin mention the safe, Ruan Qingwan was stunned. She thought she had thrown everything away long ago. Thinking back carefully, she remembered that she had thought since the key was lost, it didn't matter whether the safe was thrown away or not. She hadn't expected that Pei Zhilin, who had thrown it away so decisively, would actually go back and find the key. While Ruan Qingwan was lost in thought, Xing Qijia spoke up, clearly displeased. Are you really going to pretend I don't exist? Trying to steal my girlfriend right in front of me, Pei Xingyan, when did I give you the impression I was so easygoing? Pei Xingyan ignored him completely, still looking at Ruan Qingwan, waiting for her answer, his heart filled with anxiety and excitement. As for Xing Qijiao, they were mortal enemies. Even if he made him hate him even more, so what? Now, all he wanted was Ruan Qingwan. Moreover, when Xing Qijiao pursued Ruan Qingwan, how could he not have known about their relationship with her? As the two argued, Ruan Qingwan looked down at Pei Zhilin, who was still clinging to her leg, his eyes full of pleading. If this had been 5 years ago, before Pei Yin returned, and they were pleading and begging like this, Ruan Qingwan might have softened. But after experiencing so much, they no longer held the most important place in her heart. Family was important, but she was more important. No one in this world has the obligation to wait forever for your remorse. Before I became a mother, I was still myself. Ruan Qingwan pried Pei Zhilin's arms off her and shook her head, as if speaking to him, yet also answering Pei Xingyan. I lost myself for a long time. Now, I've not only found myself, but also found a partner who is right for me. Why should I give up my current life and boyfriend because of your remorse? Ruan Qingwan left with Xing Qizhao. Pei Xingyan wanted to chase after them, but old Master Pei suddenly called. Mr. Han couldn't reach you and contacted me. Pei Xingyan, who taught you to be so disorganized because of personal matters and stand up your business partners? Only then did Pei Xingyan remember that he had originally come to Beijing on a business trip. If the cooperation with Mingdai Group went smoothly, the Pei family could successfully enter the Beijing market, and the Pei family's business could reach a new level. Now, he was long past the agreed-upon time. He was silent for a moment, watching Ruan Qingwan and Xing Qizhao gradually disappear until they were completely out of sight. Frustration churned within him. Pei Zhilin also looked at him, his eyes full of confusion, as if asking why he didn't chase after her. Is Pei Zhilin with you now? Old Master Pei's tone suddenly shifted, asking about Pei Zhilin. He hummed in agreement, not bothering to hide it. After all, Pei Zhilin had come to Beijing on old Master Pei's private jet. It would be too easy to find out his whereabouts. You saw her? You brought the child. How did she respond? What are you going to do next? His voice carried a hint of displeasure, not only towards him, but also towards Pei Zhilin and Ruan Qingwan. Pei Xingyan, I had her approach you to help you forget Pei Yin, not to become a second Pei Yin. Do you understand? Old Master Pei's meaning was clear. If Pei Xingyan continued to let personal matters interfere with business, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't intervene again. Don't bully my mom. Pei Zhilin, sharp-eared, heard the last sentence. As his personally raised great-grandson, he quickly understood the implication and became agitated. If you care so much about Ruan Qingwan, what you should be doing now is not arguing with me, but coming back quickly. And tell your unreliable father to prioritize things properly. Pei Xingyan frowned, his tone full of disagreement. You were the one who said I should go find her and apologize to her first. Why was he now being accused of not prioritizing things correctly? What was important and what was not? What could wait and what was urgent? Why should his entire life revolve around the company? Why could old Master Pei send away the woman he loved, arrange his marriage, dictate when he shouldn't be depressed, and now tell him he couldn't pursue the woman he loved and had to focus on business? I said that so you wouldn't continue to wallow in despair. Old Master Pei was furious. He hadn't expected that after 5 years, the words he had used to comfort him would be used against him. Pei Xingyan, don't forget, you are the CEO of the Pei Group. Your every move represents the Pei Group. For the first time, Pei Xingyan was more resolute than when he had declared he would give up his position as heir to the Pei Group to be with Pei Yin. I also said a long time ago that I don't need this position. That feeling of helplessness rose again. Old Master Pei began to wonder where he had gone wrong in raising such a stubborn and inflexible grandson. After a long silence, he suddenly laughed. Do you think I can't do without you? Fine. You want to go down this path, I can leave you alone. But you must send Pei Zhilin back to me today. The threat was clear, but Pei Xingyan seemed relieved, letting out a long sigh. I'll send him back right now. Early in the morning, Ruan Qingwan woke from her sleep and habitually checked her phone. The next second, countless missed calls flooded her phone, so many that it lagged for a moment. She instinctively thought something had happened at the research institute and hurriedly got up, washed up, changed her clothes, and was about to rush out. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Xing Qizhao, wearing an apron, came out of the kitchen after hearing the commotion. Seeing her panic look, he was a little puzzled, but still handed her the warm milk he had been keeping warm. Drink some milk first to line your stomach. I just saw a lot of missed calls. I think something might have happened at the institute. I have to go and see. She took the milk with her messy hair and took a sip, explaining vaguely. After she finished speaking, she suddenly realized something was wrong. This apartment was near the institute. If there was something urgent that required so many calls, they wouldn't have waited for her to wake up naturally. Her senior colleagues would have come directly to her door instead of giving up after failing to reach her. Her tense nerves relaxed, and she let out a long breath. After calming down, she finally had time to see who had called. Seeing her like this, Xing Qizhao smiled and guided her to sit at the dining table, turning around to bring her a fried egg. Since it's not about the institute, let's eat and check at the same time. The missed calls weren't from the same number, but each number had called many times. She didn't know if it was a prank or if someone really had an emergency. She then opened her messages and saw a long string of red notifications. Each message contained only one short sentence: Zhilin is missing. After reading the message, Ruan Qingwan's mind went blank. Missing? What did that mean? But it was these messages that gave her a clue about the missed calls. Pei Xingyan. She hurriedly scrolled to the first number that called and dialed back. As soon as the call connected, she asked, "What happened?" Pei Xingyan felt a surge of bitterness, but didn't dare to delay, explaining the situation from beginning to end. "Grandpa asked me to send Zhilin back. I put him on the plane," but Butler Cha said. He waited for a long time but didn't see Zhilin. Then he saw the other bodyguards who escorted Zhilin run out, saying that Zhilin had been kidnapped. "Awan, I'm sorry, I didn't protect our child." At this moment, Pei Xingyan's heart was filled with indescribable complexity. He didn't know whether to be furious that someone dared to kidnap Pei Zhilin right under his and Pei's grandfather's noses, or to be heartbroken that only Pei Zhilin's kidnapping could make Ruan Qingwan contact him. She frowned, her heart also starting to feel irritated. Pei Zhilin was kidnapped? Xing Qizha sat down beside her with another breakfast, but he happened to hear Pei Xingyan's voice from the phone. After hesitating for a moment, he asked, "Is it in Nanqing? Do you need my help?" It wasn't that he had the leisure to care about the Pei family's affairs. It was just that he could see that Pei Zhilin was, after all, the child Ruan Qingwan had carried for 10 months. She might be heartbroken by his past actions and wouldn't soften or forgive him because of his apology, but she wouldn't stand idly by when Pei Zhilin was in danger, possibly even facing death. She was, after all, an ordinary person, unable to be so completely heartless. "Thank you." But before Xing Qizha could start investigating, Pei Xingyan received a message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was very short. "Pei Zhilin is in my hands. If you want him to live, meet me at Dianzhou port tomorrow at noon. If you dare call the police, I'll let him be buried with me." One sentence made Ruan Qingwan's heart hang high. The kidnapper didn't ask for money, so what else could they want? Ruan Qingwan and Xing Qizha flew back to Nanqing overnight. At noon the next day, the group arrived at Dianzhou harbor on time. The harbor was calm. Large ships had already gone out to sea, leaving only a small boat tied to the harbor with a thin rope, bobbing on the water. On the boat, there were only 2 figures, one large and one small. Clearly, these were the kidnappers they were looking for. With just one glance, Pei Xingyan, Ruan Qingwan, and Xing Qizha recognized the kidnapper who had abducted Pei Zhilin. "Pei Yin!" the 3 exclaimed in unison. Pei Xingyan frowned deeply and said impatiently, "Pei Yin, what are you doing?" Hearing the sound, Pei Yin turned around. With nothing to obscure her face, the long scar at the corner of her eye was visible to everyone. Pei Zhilin, bound and gagged, lay unconscious in front of her, shielding her body. She froze for a moment when she saw the 3 people opposite her. But soon, the madness in her eyes intensified. "Ruan Qingwan, you're back?" Seeing her focus on Ruan Qingwan, Pei Xingyan and Xing Qizha instinctively shielded her. "Tell us, what do you want to release Pei Zhilin?" Looking at Ruan Qingwan, securely protected behind the 2 men, Pei Yin tasted the bitterness of jealousy for the first time. Anger churned in her chest, the resentment in her eyes almost palpable. She didn't understand. They were both expelled from the Pei family, so why was she so miserable? The scar at the corner of her eye could have been avoided. The Pei family was so heartless, they only stopped the bleeding and then kicked her out of the hospital. She was removed from the Pei family registry, all her assets were frozen, and she was left with a hideous scar that couldn't be removed. She ended up homeless, surviving by scavenging leftovers from trash cans. But what about Ruan Qingwan? She wore luxury brands, her face even more beautiful than before she was expelled from the Pei family. As if that wasn't enough, even Pei Xingyan and Xing Qizha were protecting her. She was unwilling to accept this. "Didn't you ask what I want?" Pei Yin held a dagger near Pei Zhilin with one hand and dragged him closer to the edge of the boat with the other, her viciousness evident, directed at Ruan Qingwan. "I only have 2 conditions. If you meet them, I'll release Pei Zhilin. 1. You marry me. 2. Trade Ruan Qingwan for Pei Zhilin." Pei Yin stared intently at Pei Xingyan, placing the choice in his hands. Either marry her, let her kill Ruan Qingwan to vent her anger, and she would temporarily spare Ruan Qingwan's bastard, or choose to let Pei Zhilin die. After her words, the surroundings fell silent, leaving only the incessant whistling of the wind. Handing over Ruan Qingwan was never an option for Pei Xingyan and Xing Qizha. But they couldn't abandon Pei Zhilin either. "The first one is possible, the second one is not. Change your second demand." After a moment, seeing Pei Xingyan still frozen in place, Xing Qizhao shook his head, his refusal resolute. Hearing this, Pei Xingyan was about to explode, ready to refuse outright, but he was defeated by the looks from Xing Qizhao and Ruan Qingwan. Pei Yin naturally saw Pei Xingyan's reluctance. Biting her lip, her anger intensified, and she was even more unwilling to compromise. During the stalemate, Pei Yin seemed to suddenly sense something. She looked at them vigilantly. "Don't tell me you're trying to stall for time," I said. "If you dare call the police, I'll take him down with me." By the end, her voice trembled. The composure of the three opposite her made her even more panicked. She showed her fear, and her grip on the dagger tightened unconsciously. A trickle of blood seeped from Pei Zhilin's delicate neck. The pain startled him awake. The next second, he started wailing uncontrollably, "Mommy, save me." The piercing cries made Ruan Qingwan's heart tremble. She looked at him from afar, her heart pounding, praying that the police could rescue him safely. But she wouldn't exchange herself for him. "Stop crying. Cry again, and I'll kill you." Unexpectedly awakened by Pei Zhilin's cries, Pei Yin was annoyed by the piercing noise. Intending to observe the reactions of Pei Xingyan and the others, she glanced sideways and suddenly saw a dark muzzle pointed at her. Not a desperate criminal by nature, she was overcome with boundless fear at the scene before her. The strength in her hand faltered, and Pei Yin's mind was consumed by a single, repeating thought. They called the police. They still called the police. She's going to die. Pei Yin didn't want to die. Panic robbed her of the ability to think, and she could only instinctively tighten her grip on the only support she had, shrinking her body as much as possible. Frantically searching for a way to survive, her gaze landed on Ruan Qingwan's eyes, which, despite her best efforts, revealed a flicker of worry. A desperate thought suddenly consumed her. If she was destined to die tonight, she would take them all with her. The cries continued, but Pei Yin no longer felt irritated. Maintaining her hold, she looked up at them. "I know you called the police, so I've changed my mind. I want all of you to get on the boat. Once we reach safety, I'll leave on my own." Perhaps because she had made her decision, Pei Yin had never felt her mind so clear. After a moment of hesitation, Pei Xingyan was the first to step forward, followed closely by Ruan Qingwan and Xing Qizhao. Protected between the two, Ruan Qingwan watched Pei Yin on the sea, trying to hide behind Pei Zhilin. A sense of foreboding washed over her. The closer they got, the stronger the feeling became. Finally, reaching the edge of the dock, she suddenly tugged hard on Xing Qizhao's sleeve. "I have a feeling her plan isn't just to leave." As her hushed words fell, Pei Xingyan boarded the boat. In the next second, Pei Yin lunged without warning. With a sickening thud, a sharp knife plunged into Pei Xingyan's throat. Then, bang! A gunshot rang out. Ruan Qingwan instinctively turned, but warm hands covered her eyes. Xing Qizhao's trembling voice reached her ears. "Don't look." 3 splashes followed, and the crying abruptly stopped. Police and rescue personnel, already lying in wait, rushed to the scene. More splashes sounded. When Ruan Qingwan pulled Xing Qizhao's hands away, all that remained, aside from a pool of crimson blood on the small wooden boat, were rescuers with safety ropes, diving repeatedly to search for the 3 who had just fallen into the water. For 6 whole years, she had worked diligently and without complaint. But after Pei Yin's recent return, his buried affections had immediately rekindled. Even their son, frequently taken to see Pei Yin, had developed a fondness for her and begun to resent his own mother. "Qingwan." Before he could finish his sentence, she felt a tightness in her chest, her vision went black, and she collapsed. The only sound remaining was Xing Qizhao's fading cry of alarm. Ruan Qingwan didn't wake up for 2 days. The pungent smell of disinfectant momentarily disoriented her. She had almost forgotten the last time she had been in a hospital. She weakly flexed her fingers, and Xing Qizhao, who had been holding her hand by the bedside, woke up. The television on the wall was broadcasting the latest news. The headline below screamed, "Former adopted daughter of the Pei family, driven by resentment, orchestrates revenge, CEO and son of Pei group drown." Xing Qizhao glanced at the report and quickly changed the channel. Several channels later, the same news was being broadcast. He sheepishly turned off the television, annoyed that he hadn't done so sooner. "It's not your fault," Ruan Qingwan murmured, shaking her head. From beginning to end, Xing Qizhao had nothing to do with this. The resentment Pei Yin harbored was a seed sown by Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin themselves. Now they were reaping what they had sown, and they couldn't blame anyone else. After a moment of silence, she looked up, her voice weak. "I want to see them." Death severed their ties. From now on, they would return to dust, grievances and affections, love and hate, all dissolved. Ruan Qingwan wasn't able to see Pei Xingyan and Pei Zhilin one last time. Old man Pei stopped her outside the funeral home. His eyes were clouded as he waved them away. "Go back. Just go back." Having outlived his son and grandson, he didn't know whether to resent the tangled relationships that had led to the deaths of these young people or to blame his own stubbornness for pushing everyone to this tragic end. The long night stretched on. Fireworks bloomed in the city sky. This new year didn't belong to them.